Welcome to Global Citizen Life podcast. Today on the show, we have Jonathan Grimm. Jonathan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here.
Jonathan, you've written a book called Future Poor. And one of the first few sentences that you wrote in the book is it's some grim news for people who are reading it, or at least tentatively, because I find,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of times with finances, and myself included for a long time with retirement, it's so far away. I have so much time. We kind of have our head in the sand thinking we've got 40, 50 years or more before we get to retirement. And then it's just all of a sudden, it's kind of creeping up on us. And we've only got maybe 20 or 30 years before retirement. And now we're thinking, what am I going to do? Or
Yeah.
the I have some money put away in 401ks, a Roth IRA from Canada, RRSPs, funded or tax-free savings accounts and different things. And we'll get into those. But I think it's very interesting, though, that we all kind of have this retirement fantasy,
Yeah.
as in, hopefully by then my house will be paid off. And so I will have this money, assuming similar to the income that I'm making now, to travel, to go golfing, to do some shopping, go to the beach, and really do whatever I want whenever I want. And it's this kind of luxury fantasy. But for most of us, it's not going to be reality.
Yeah. Yeah. It just because it takes so much money in order to do that. And a prolonged, like I think of it in terms of a prolonged vacation. When you don't have income coming in, you have to live off of your assets. And so, it's like why we save for a vacation. We save up money so that we can go and be free of essentially having to work and earn income, and then we can enjoy leisure. When you apply that over a long period of time, and when you apply that to retirement specifically, and thinking from 65 to 85, 90, that's a lot of years that just requires a lot of resources and a lot of assets in order to live off of them. And then trying to match that asset number to, we don't really know what's going to happen in your particular future. And is it going to be 5 years, 30 years? Are you going to have medical issues? Are there other care issues? Are you going to have to care for a spouse or another loved one? I mean, the list is endless. And
Mhm.
so then trying to be very precise in getting people to a very specific number for something that just can't be precise is a challenge. And all of that sort of sits behind the idea that I think most people in America, probably Canada and other Western parts of the world that maybe don't have the same infrastructure to support people as they age, it's gonna be a challenge, and a lot of people will end up poor, which is why I call it the future poor.
Right. And I think too, so when the government picked the retirement age of 65, I don't know the year that it happened, but back in the day when they did,
Yep.
correct me if I'm wrong though, wasn't the average life expectancy around 68? So at that time, people by the time if they lived to retirement, it wasn't much after where they passed away. And so therefore the government did have extra funds and money and investments and things to pay these people for a couple of years. But
Yeah.
as we know now, people are living a lot longer. And so, I think about it too of I've said before since I was in high school, people thought I was crazy back then. And maybe, it probably did sound crazy. I was like 16 years old and I was saying, I'm going to live till I'm 120. And people were like, you're ridiculous. You're dumb. Nobody lives that long. And I just
Yeah.
thought, by the time, and even back then, people were into their 70s easily. And I thought, by the time I'm that age, maybe. And I still think now, I mean, I'm not 50 yet, but I still think it's quite possible living a healthy lifestyle and things like that. That I mean, 120 is probably still pushing it, but easily in hundreds, easily into the hundreds, because that's more than 50 years away. Of course, granted, healthy and things like that. But then to think if I worked, let's say, starting at 20 years old to 65, how is that possible that I'm gonna save, even if I saved half of my earnings, which I definitely didn't, that from
Yeah.
65 to like 110 with the increase in cost of living, like that math just simply doesn't even work.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem. And the original retirement age from Germany in 1890, when they were trying to establish sort of the first social insurance program to get people out of the workforce, they originally were looking at like the age 70. And even that was an extreme age because the average life expectancy didn't hit what we consider full retirement age. It was still below 65 until the middle of I want to say it was the middle of the 20th century that we started to eclipse that the average life expectancy started to creep over 60. And so you do create a complicated problem, and in order to have a year off in retirement, I think you need to save half your income each year that you want to essentially make that happen. It's why I consider it like a $30,000 a year problem for most people in that they need to save essentially half their income every year in order to have a year off in the end. And that for most people is just not feasible. Most of us, I mean, I think everyone's like, sure, I'd love to save half my income, but the realities of life, whether it's the price of goods, the cost of living, the fact that at that time, when retirement started, there weren't things like washing machines and electricity and cars and gas and car insurance and medical insurance and internet and smartphones, and the list just goes on and on and on. And so the fact that we just require so much more resources in order just to have a basic standard of living just really eats into what people are actually able to do as far as savings goes. And then the math just the math just continues to work itself out that you just have to have a lot of stuff saved, and that requires you being able to save a lot early and often and for a long period of time. So that's where most
Right.
people find themselves in that pickle of of not being able to do that. And that's part of why it presents a real problem as far as what are we going to do when we have a bunch of people approaching their senior years without the resources required.
Right. And I work with a lot of people, and an answer to a lot of them will say, well, I'll
Mm.
just move abroad where it's cheaper.
Yeah.
And that is a potential. However, I mean, there's pros and cons to moving abroad as well. I mean, if you
Hmm.
reach your retirement age, which I don't think is very old at all, 65 now is not old, but if you leave retirement, if you're forced to leave to move to a country, are you really going to be happy? Are you going just because you can't afford to live where you have your family, your friends, your community, your everything? Because
Hmm.
starting all over, it's not always easy. Sure, some things are cheaper, but you've got to start making friends, building community, learning a new
Yeah.
language, figuring out how things work. And I mean, that's just like the beginning of it. And so, even though I love moving abroad and I've lived in many countries and I will continue to do so, it's not that easy. And to do it only because you can't afford to live where you're at could bring in a little bit more resentment towards the life that you're now having to do
Yeah.
because the cost of living. And so when I talk with people and clients and stuff, and they want to move abroad, my first question is always why? Like, why is it? What are you looking for? And one, okay, if it's finances, I do understand that, but it needs to be more
Hmm.
than that. And so it is something to consider. But there's ways that we can at least kind of mitigate our cost of living. I do believe also at whatever age we're at, we can start doing things to start saving. Um, and a lot of times, especially in North America, we have so much crap. Like, we have so much stuff that we just don't need. Like, for
Yeah.
one thing, I always tell people just stop buying stuff. Even if you're considering moving abroad for any reason, I say stop buying stuff because for one, you're going to buy it and then what? You're going to sell it at pennies on the dollar because it's not worth shipping halfway around the world or, to
Yeah.
another country and all of that. And the other part is, do you really need it? Like, what do you really need? And I think about that whenever I'm buying things. do I need this? Is it going to bring me joy? Am I really going to use it? Or can I put that money into an investment account or even just a bank account so then I can use that to book a flight to go to X destination? Because I will
Hmm.
have more enjoyment out of that than another pair of shoes, unless
Yeah.
I need shoes. Like, obviously, there's things that we need, but we buy a lot of things that we just don't need.
Yeah, and that tends to be part of the equation in when I meet with clients and talk to them, is like we all understand that cash in one sense is one of our least important things because we'll always trade it for something else.
Mm,
And that can be really disarming, is like, hey, you want a hamburger more than you want your cash. And it's like, oh yeah, actually, yeah, I do. I want shoes more than I want my cash, and that provides more value to me. And so part of it is understanding how and why we behaviorally do what we do and spend, and what the values of those things. And there's the other side of looking at, okay, if I don't, I have this conversation a lot, especially with younger people that are trying to figure this equation out. And they'll go, but if I save $100, that doesn't really drastically change any sort of future outcome. And it's like, yeah, we live in sort of this weird balance between the two. And some people feel like, well, I'd rather have fun now. What am I going to do? Save for 50 years and not have anything? So it's a really weird behavioral thing that we're in, as well as a math and money and finance thing. And I think you bring up a good point of relocating for seniors oftentimes is really, really challenging, whether you're in North America or you try and go abroad. And and that just becomes an extra complicating factor of trying to understand how what we've done in the past now gets us to a spot today to make decisions. And oftentimes we don't have the ability to think that far in the future, or understand how, well, I didn't buy those shoes, so now I have $100, but that could really help you in a significant way if it's placed somewhere valuable. So it's
mm-mm.
very much a psychology thing, as well as a math and finance and strategy and accounts and investments and all those things as well.
The other day I was watching or listening to Diary of a CEO, and they were talking about the intrinsic value of things. And I think Steve bought like lunch for everybody or spent $100 to bring in some snacks or whatever it was. And she was saying, well, if you would have invested that in, it could have been 30 years or 40 years, it's a significant amount of time, but that $100 potentially could have been worth 5,000. So if you think of every time you spend 100, it could be worth five. However, sometimes it is better to spend that 100 because of the value that it's bringing to you
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
And so it is a little bit of that balance. And I think I've talked to some other people and finances and things like that. And they kind of say to have jars or envelopes or folders or accounts that you have your major expenses in one account or jar or folder, and then you have some investing, a percentage of investing, and you do have a percentage of your income that they call play money. That's
Hmm.
just you go blow it and you don't feel
Yeah.
guilty about it. You do the things that you enjoy doing, but having that kind of spread out and allocated to certain things is the best way so you can instill joy and splurge and save and invest and live within your means, which is key because living off of credit cards, as we know, is not good.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some things in there that we've lived off of, a lot of rules with regards to what percentages to put away and the expected outcomes that those will do. And I believe we're in a really big transition away from a lot of that old advice. And that is creating problems for people, because you have different generations operating in different economic areas and different economic systems. And so you have you have people that were probably 40 to 50, maybe to 60, that sort of grew up in the spending boom of the 80s and 90s, and the early 2000s, only to find that that didn't work. And then you have a new generation of people that are not doing that as much, and but they also don't have as much disposable income. And so their problem is very different, and their future forecast of where they're going to be and where they're going to end up is quite different for very different factors. And so part of that is layering on the right advice and the right systems and tools for the particular people that working with. And like I find I deal a whole lot less with credit card debt and consumer debt than probably a previous generation did. Newer people just don't have it as much. Student loan debt, that's a totally different thing that America is notorious for. And that's a very different animal than consumer debt. And so,
Mhm.
but then how we sort of look at those different things and create strategies and things that make sense for people, and questioning the outcomes of, if you put 15% away in a retirement account, which is a general rule of thumb that a lot of people say, does that actually work? Will that actually produce the outcome in the future? And as opposed to just thinking, oh yeah, that works. And so when we work backwards and sort of question and look at those things, then we start to hopefully make different strategies and better strategies, and figure things out a little bit better, and in ways that create a little bit more flexibility and freedom for people um, in the future, so that when they get there, hopefully they have some options, or whatever life brings, they have options. And a lot of some of the old methods just probably aren't working as well as they did in for previous generations. And so that creates some challenges, especially as we look out to the future and try and predict where we might be heading. And so, but I do think that there are some definite things in there that we gotta tackle, and we gotta look at with people, and help understand, and then really create things that, I think that intrinsic value piece that you mentioned, I think a lot more people are working off of that than trying to understand where $100 will be in the future. And so we kind of got to play with both sides of that equation, because
Mhm.
we know that it just requires a lot of money to have saved, and yet people still want to have value and have a good life now.
Absolutely, because well, we just don't know how much time we have, right?
Hmm.
Like if we knew, things would be easier because we could figure
Yeah.
out how much we need, what we can spend, all of those types of things. But a few things that, well, one thing that we know for sure is just keeping money in the bank is not a good idea. Obviously, having some in the bank for sure to pay for a few months is great, but we've just even seen in the last 5 years of how much inflation and things have gone up in value,
Hmm.
which made that money that we have in the bank, that purchasing power, truly decrease. So we know that having too much in the bank isn't a good thing, and that we really need to invest it. And diversification, I believe, is key, and it depends on lifestyle and the things that
Yep.
people want, and obviously the level of volatility and risk that people are willing to take. But one thing, and I remember saying quite some time ago to friends, and I'm still a little bit unsure of it. So I'm from Canada, and we have our
Hmm.
RRSPs, our registered retirement
Yep.
savings account. And there's always been a little part of me that thinks, how do I know that that money's going to be there? Like, let's be honest, we know the government is not good with budgeting and things like that. And we've seen cities, large US cities, go bankrupt, and the
Hmm.
debt. And so there's always part of me that says, I know I should be putting money into RRSPs. And if somebody has an employer who's willing to match and all those things, and then absolutely that's great. But if you're self-employed and you don't, part of me is like, how can I trust that that will be there and the government will do well, as opposed to looking at other investments that may be better for me?
Yeah, that is, I think, everyone's question. And I believe the old response was just to have as much money as possible. And in theory, that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people then operate from that. And because we all know having more money is better than having less money.
Of
And
course.
but one of the things that I specifically try and work with people on is to understand what they need money for. And oftentimes that's where all the problems are. And so, like, you asked the question, will the money be there? It's like, you might have a number on a page today, but will that number be the same tomorrow? And will what I need the money for be enough, is usually people's question. Or will it do a good job for whatever I need it to do? And that's where what I try and help people understand is there are very different financial tools that are out there that do things very, very differently. And I don't know that the industry by and large wants people to know that, because they just want you to invest with them. And
Hmm.
because most of the industry only knows how to make money off of large sums of money. And so the way you keep that machine going is you keep having people put money in the things that make you money. And so
Right.
there's a little bit of a strange scenario there, but the truth of the matter is there are very different financial tools for very different jobs that life demands. I oftentimes tell people, I use the analogy of you can't paint a wall with a hammer, and because it's like logical, like yeah, you need a paintbrush for that. And so
Mhm.
one of the things that is really important is understanding when it's time for you to use your money, is the tool that you put it in good for that job? And most of us just think money is money. But once you place money in like an RRSP or a 401k or an IRA or in the bank or in a high yield savings account or a Roth IRA, every one of those tools works very, very, very differently. And when it's time to actually go to use money, which is the whole point, is to have it to use it, does it do a good job for what you need it for? And almost no planning is done off of that equation. It we don't look at it from backwards to forwards. We go, no, let's accumulate a bunch of stuff and figure out how we're going to spend it later, as opposed to no, if we look at what we need money for, we can actually save in a different way that will actually give us more money on the output. And so that's where we have these different things like car insurance. Like I always tell people, like, hey, if you get in a car accident, you don't look at your 401k. Like that's not your
Right.
first. That's not you call your car insurance provider. You break your arm, you don't look at your Robinhood account. You get your health insurance out, because those are financial tools that specifically make more money for those types of jobs that
Mhm.
life brings. And so what we find is what the industry has done for a long time is focus on accumulation and then distribution, and that makes a lot of sense, and it seems logical, and it's easy. But what we've not done is gone, well, what does distribution actually look like? What does money need to be in that in the end? And so then when we work backwards, that's the real magic. And that's what a lot of people haven't done. And then they come to distribution or they come to retirement and they're like, oh, this doesn't do as much as I thought it would. And then that's where you could end up in a situation like people retiring in 2008 had just a horrible time because their 401ks, we always joke they
Right.
they became 201ks because they were half the value. And so that's where all those things start to come into play, and then people realize, oh, there's a lot more that I need to consider in this equation than I thought. And you probably have run into that too, people thinking about retiring abroad. There ends up being a lot more things you need to think about other than housing is cheaper. So
Right. You can't just pack a suitcase and show up and just be like, I'm staying here now.
yeah,
There's a lot of
yeah.
things to consider and just even picking the right place.
Yeah, yeah. And so all those things start to be like real big
Mhm.
considerations that oftentimes we don't think about on the journey, but we need people that can think about that for us to help us strategize and plan so that when those things come, we're much better prepared. And
Right.
oftentimes people don't like to think about those things, either because
No.
they're far off or they're not fun. Like your future medical care is usually not something that people are very, like to think about, or the fact that there is a likelihood that they will die in the future. These are just things we don't want. Our disposition and our minds just don't really want to think about bad things happening, and yet they happen to us all the time. And so,
They do. They do. I was just talking to a friend of mine last night and about her will because her daughter they've
mm,
got several pets and one is very protective of them and so her daughter said to her like what happens if we were both in a like we died in a car accident together like what would happen to all of our pets and
mm,
especially the one that
yeah,
I'll say has special needs
okay,
and I asked her I said do you have a will done she's like yeah but it was done 20 years ago. And I said, well,
Oh,
a lot's
yeah.
changed in 20 years. Like, you need to get it done. I said, I know it's not a fun subject. And we both lost our moms last year.
Mm, sorry to hear
And
that.
and I said to her, like, you need to do it. Like, it has to be done. It's preparing. And yeah, it's not fun to talk about, but the reality is it will happen to all of us. And,
Yeah.
and that's the same with, as you said, like medical things. What you do now and how you live now will affect you in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So we really need to do that. If you have an unhealthy life now, of course you can turn things around, but if you don't,
Yeah.
there is going to be an effect, and we need to be aware. And you wrote in your book, what was it now? It was, I'm just trying to look at, there was a percentage. I think it was 63% of people don't understand how their 401ks or their retirement plans kind of work, which is,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not shocking because I can kind of get it, because again, I for the longest time too was just kind of head in the sand, or just, okay, this is what put my money in an RSP and it'll be there for when I retire, and then I have these assumptions of how I'm going to retire, but it's not exactly how it works. And that's comes back to also saying you need to have the right tools for the life that you want to have when you get into retirement.
Yeah. Well, I've met with people that are essentially, I call them 401k rich, but have no
Mhm.
money, because they're not 59 and a half. And so if you look at the equation, you're like, okay, well, that's money. I mean, you can use it, but you pay a penalty. And in the US
Mm,
for using it, you 10% penalty on top of the taxes that are required. And, and people are like, but I have all this money saved. I'm like, yeah, but you have no cash. Like, you can't do
right.
anything. So what if you need cash? Then that tool becomes a really bad tool, and there's a heavy cost to translate that 401k into cash. And then there's a cost if you have cash. Say we mentioned cash in the bank. Like, there's a
Yeah.
cost. You're buying inflation, and people are like, but I'm not buying anything. It's just sitting at the bank. It's like, no, it's you're buying. You're always buying, and so those sorts of things start to, you know creep up. And like, one of the biggest things that people don't understand is that, it's always amazes me when I talk to people about their 401k being taxable when they go to
Mm,
use it, and they're like, wait, what? And it's like, yeah, and it has effect on, like, in the US, it means your social security is subject to income tax. And they're like, what? How is that possible? And it's like, yeah, because these tools are all designed, like, when they work together, they have effect on each other. and
mhm.
and people are like, wait, how is my 401k taxable, or how is my social security income taxable? And it's like, well, because you didn't pay the taxes on the 401k at the front end, and so now you've built
Right.
up a huge tax liability. And then that becomes complicated. It's like, well, if you need more
Mhm.
money out of it, you got to pay a higher price to get your access to your money. And there's all kinds of fancy strategies on how to try and get your 401k out without taxes. They but they require extreme precision that maybe your life won't cooperate
Right.
with. And so then it's like, okay, now you have this huge tax liability, or now you have all this money in the market, and so what if the market's down? Yeah, and like, you ask advisors, like, okay, what do you do if the market's down? Well, you should probably have non-market assets. Okay, do you advise your clients into non-market assets? And they're like, no. And you're like, wait, what are we doing? We gotta do better in this planning situation. And the tax liability, of, most people sort of operate on the idea, oh, you'll pay less taxes in the future, and or you'll be in a better tax situation later. So if you put your money in at 22% tax, and take it out at 12, you save money, and that's not always the case. And that's not always how the math works out. And so it just requires so much more careful planning and so much more precision than I think we've been able to operate under, or we've been willing to admit as financial professionals, that it actually requires way more precision than what we say. And because life just demands a whole lot of precision. And
Right.
we work off of probabilities of hypothetical rates of return and things like that, as opposed to really precise planning and really
Mm.
precise tools.
Well, and some numbers that you used, in the book was a 4% rule. So
Yep.
if somebody had, say, roughly $750,000 in investments, so they're
Hmm.
making a minimum 4+%, then that could last a long time, because if they're only withdrawing 4% every year, that would be roughly $30,000 a year. Now, sure, that could be great for most years, perhaps, depending if your home is paid for, if you don't need a car, if you don't
Yeah.
like there's certain things, or at least, I mean, even at being retired at 65, I'm assuming even if you bought a new car at 64, you're probably not going to have that one for forever. Like,
Hmm.
especially if you live till you're into your 90s, or maybe even longer. And so there could be times, or some certain years, that you're going to have bigger expenses or more expenses. And so if you're not in invested, diversified, but yet properly, to have $750,000 and only living off of 4%, um, and that assumes too that everything is still going well, right? And we do know market
Yeah.
crashes happen, and there's going to be
Hmm.
years that that money could go in half, as we've seen before in roughly 2008, when people lost almost half. Of course, it's gone back up, but it's taken many, many years for that to happen over time.
Yeah. Market corrections take a really big toll, and it's one of the things that we don't, I think, in the industry, we don't give enough credit to corrections. It's hard to predict corrections, and it's also hard to sell products with corrections built in because it shows less money.
Right.
And that's just a reality that we have to really look at. And we use average rates of return when we should use actual rates of return, because actual rates of return are far less, and they have dramatic impact. And so if you're one of the lucky people, which there's very few people that I think will ever have $750,000 saved for retirement or just in general, but if you do, and let's say you do have that paid off home, and then all of a sudden you need a new roof, it's like, oh, here's 20 grand. I gotta
Mhm.
yank an extra 20 grand out. And so, those things, especially if the market's flat or negative, those things exponentially cut your account. And so that's where we say, like, well, if the market's down, don't take your money out. It's like, well, what if all your money is in the market? And that could be stocks and bonds. So in the US, we saw recently where both can be down at the same time. And it's like, well, we always say bonds are safe, but they're not. And so that equation sort of can present a real problem for people, especially if when it's time that they actually need their money. And
Mhm.
those sorts of things can create really unpredictable situations and cut the legs out from underneath someone at a time when they really can't afford to have that. Even with something like $750,000, 30,000 doesn't go very far. Uh, I'm in the Los Angeles area; it's basically goes nowhere. And so,
Right.
you can see something where it's like, well, what's housing cost if you have $2,800 a month to live on? Um, or if you have, $2,500 a month after taxes, like, where does that go? Property taxes, auto, your insurance, your all
Mhm.
these other things just start to make that little bit of money go away very, very fast. And yes, there's math that can sort of show, like, well, yeah, just make sure your living expenses are under $1,000 a month, uh, and you'll be okay. And it's like, yeah, but that's not feasible for most people.
Right.
That's not what really works. Groceries alone might cost you more than that. Who knows? And so that's just sort of part of the overall problem around trying to live off of our assets as opposed to having income or having other things in our sort of in our toolbox when it comes to our financial lives.
Hmm. And one that in the book, you've talked about lots of different options, and everybody should definitely get your book, and we'll talk about it in
Mm.
a minute here. But another thing that you talked about in there briefly is life insurance. And I
Yep.
think a lot of people, myself included, up until kind of recently, within the last few years, I would always think, well, life insurance is to pay my debts and have money for my daughter and have things paid for when I'm gone. So I'm
Yeah.
just paying ahead. But there's different types of policies that are available for
Yeah.
people that could help in situations when we're still
Yep.
alive.
Yeah, that the life insurance thing is always one that raises eyebrows, because it's really, I think it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of the financial world, and for a lot of reasons, life insurance gets a bad name because it's earned a bad name, and because there's a lot of bad life insurance out
Mm,
there, and I've said this on other podcasts that I've done, but anyone that listens, I will do free life insurance reviews for anyone that listens, because part of what we do with me and my team is we try and help people get out of bad life insurance and either into something that'll work better, or even just help people understand that there might be a life insurance product that would actually meet their needs better than the one that they're in. And it's amazing how many bad life insurance policies I come across, and sometimes you're just like, no, this is bad, get out. And sometimes people end up having something that's really good and really beneficial, and then they're surprised to understand all the extra benefits that come from it. Because life insurance operates, especially on the permanent side, operates as a private contract. It has certain advantages that oftentimes people don't understand, and because they're a private contract, they're also tend to be complicated, is
right.
why they're challenging to kind of wrap your mind around, because they don't operate like other financial tools out there. We understand real estate, we understand the stock market because it's a lot easier. It goes up and down, and that's a whole lot simpler. And at the end of
Hmm.
the day, it goes up over time. Okay, that's a whole lot easier to understand than the mechanics of a permanent life insurance contract. But they do have, if they're done well and built well, life insurance can provide a great additional financial tool to the toolbox that you've got, and in many cases complements some of our other financial tools really, really well. And because oftentimes they live outside the tax system, like in the United States, and so having access to tax-free money can be a real benefit. And having access to money before you're 60 can oftentimes be a real benefit. And if they're done right, some of them have direct market participation. And so they can function more like an investment account, because the cash in them is actually invested. And so then you can get tax-free growth with market participation and access to money before you're 60. So they can do certain things really, really well, but they also, if they're not built very, very specifically for certain
Hmm.
jobs, they will underperform, which is why you get things like buy term and invest the difference, because most permanent life insurance policies are not built well. And I don't think most life insurance agents actually know the tool that they're playing with, and so they don't know how to build it well, and then they don't know how to give their client the actual value that the tool gives. And in terms of death benefit's a magical piece to legacy planning. In some cases, it's a whole lot better to inherit a death benefit than it is to inherit a 401k or an IRA, because the US requires you, if you're not the spouse, to then liquidate that in a certain period of time. And that could be problematic for taxes and other things.
Right.
And so it's just, when we sort of take all these things into consideration, you know, eh, you know, I don't ever say life insurance is a magic wand. A lot of people say that it is. It's not. But it can be a really, really valuable thing when it's understood and built properly for your particular situation, which is why I always make that recommendation. Hey, if you have life insurance, reach out. I will help you understand what it is that you've got. And a lot of people think that they just want to cancel it, and I always tell people, like, don't cancel it till you've had it reviewed, because you might
Right.
you might unintentionally do yourself harm by doing that. Now, if it's a bad policy, we have options, and we can help people sort of either restructure or not have a total loss in that in that policy. But we also want to help people make sure that what they've got actually fits their financial life and what they actually are hoping for it to do. And in a lot of cases, we find that those tools don't. And so that's where we want to really help people understand and get
Mm.
themselves better positioned and in a spot to have that tool be used, as well as, I think, get rid of some of the myths that life insurance is bad, or that life insurance is all powerful and magical. It's neither. And so um and it, I always tell people it could be really good for you and really bad for someone else, the exact same policy. They're
Right.
not universal in any way, shape, or form. So that's where I make that open to anyone that listens. I will review your life insurance for you and help you understand what you've got and how it fits with what you're hoping for your financial life. And I will help you either understand if you need to ditch it, keep it, or
Or
switch.
change it.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And that's a lot because I think, like I said for myself before, I just thought it was money to pay off
Hmm.
things, mortgages, credit cards, whatever I had. And for people once I'm gone, that there was no actual benefit for me within it. But it's
Yeah.
obviously not the case. And there's many different ways of using it.
Yeah, and I talk about them in terms of like living benefits. A
Mm,
lot of times they have living benefits. A lot of permanent life insurance carriers will also advance you death benefit, oftentimes in case of like chronic illness, or uh, if people get something like cancer in old age, or even earlier. There's different things where they've got a lot of different unique things that can be part of the equation. So it's easy just to say it's all bad. But it's really not the case. But they do require a high level of skill in order to make them fit your life.
right. Right. And so you've written your book, and we've talked about it a little bit, called
Mhm.
Future Poor. Why did you decide to write this book? And tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so during COVID, that glorious time in all of our lives when we all had more time than we thought to be at home, I was just doing a lot of research into the economic situation that people were in. There was so much data flying around about how few people had savings and how much people couldn't afford rent or these different things, or people losing jobs, and then government stimulus packages and things. It just sort of really woke me up to what's the economic state that most people are living in? Where are people at? And in as a professional in the finance industry, retirement is so central to everything we do. That's our target. We try and, uh, for some reason, that's the target. Get to people to 65 and retire. And so when I started looking at the numbers and the math, and it sort of just woke me up to a real problem that most people are not going to be able to retire the way that they think. And in fact,
Mhm.
I think that most people will retire at or below the US poverty level. And so my background is in ethics. And so that's what I got my college degree in. And so my ethical radar kind of went up and was like, whoa, poverty's always bad in like historically bad. Every culture, every religious belief, poverty's bad. And so how do we
Mm,
keep people how if we're sending people on a path to poverty, we got to do something about that. And so that kind of gave birth to the idea of I want to explore this not only just for my own clients that I was working with, but by and large we got this larger situation that's at play. And then what are the ripple effects of, if this sort of look into the future comes true, what do we do if we have 40 or 50 million poor seniors as a country? And then what does that do to, globally? How does that impact?
mhm,
And so what sort of started for me was an exploration into it, from like a poverty sense, and then understanding what really made retirement work, especially here in the U.S. Just sort of what are the things that actually helped make this possible, and then historically, retirement's very new. Retirement itself is only about 130 years old, and most people are surprised to hear that it's a brand new idea. And it's a brand new thing in human history that we were able to actually make a system that allowed people to exit the workforce and not be impoverished. So it's a real marvel that we were able to do it, and yet the way we did it wasn't sustainable. And then people that are under the age of 50 are sort of entered into a new economy with retirement as the center, but no real ability to make that happen and to execute that. Even if they try and save a lot, like we mentioned, like I say, it's a $30,000 a year problem, and the life that most people have outside of their control doesn't allow for that level of savings. And
Right.
so then what do we do with what do we do with all of this? And so it wasn't just about outlining there's a problem, but it was really outlining, like, do we need to return to some real central truths about the way humans work and about what society does and how we care for one another and how we build systems and structures that actually take care of people throughout their life, as opposed to what we currently have, which is a problematic sort of trajectory towards poverty for most people.
Mhm. Do you think we should retire?
No. My short answer is no. I don't know that retirement is the best thing for people,
Mhm.
individually, even within their own families, socially. I don't know that it is the most sustainable sort of human trajectory, just because of the long list of things that are usually associated with retirement that we don't talk about are, depression, loneliness, anxiety, uh, increased levels of sedentary life, increase in the likelihood of earlier death, increase of other mental situations like Alzheimer's, dementia. There are just all these complicating factors that I don't know if it is the best scenario for a human. And it's really hard because everyone wants to. It sounds so much better than working until we die. And so
I
there's that sort of, you know, that space that I kind of live in, of being in between, like, oh, we all want that, but I don't know that it's good for us. And then it usually raises a lot of questions, and then I feel like I'm the only person saying I don't think it's a good idea.
You're not the only one. I
Okay.
I agree. I agree. And I agree because but we have to look at what we define as our definition of retirement.
Yeah.
I personally have had careers already that I have retired from.
Hmm.
I no longer do that, but I think if we look at it too is what would we define as retirement, or how do we want to spend um our years, because of, as you said, there's a number of things that once we're so associated with our work and what we do, it
Hmm.
becomes who we are. And then all of a
Yep.
sudden, when we don't do it anymore, we don't have that community, those people. A lot of people don't have hobbies and things. And I think, I don't know the exact statistic, but I thought I read somewhere that somewhere close to 70% of people die within 5 years of retirement. And that could be
Yeah.
for a number of factors, let alone, but a lot of it is the depression, loneliness, dementia,
Hmm.
things like that come in, because when we're working, we're keeping sharp, we're doing stuff, we're out and about. And I think that's the importance. So it's not so much of retire. Yeah, if you can, stop doing the job you hate. I mean, as soon as you can, stop doing the
Yeah.
job that you hate
Yeah.
if you can, but do things that you enjoy doing. You could have, as we all hear so much, the side hustle, the side gig, the whatever,
Hmm.
that could become our job, or a thing that we do 3 days a week,
Yeah.
or whatever time that we enjoy doing. And so I don't think that just stopping work and kind of like doing nothing other than going to the beach, surfing, golfing, like, you still have to
Yeah.
be using our brain to do stuff, have community, be out, be around people. That's what to be human, those are the things that we need. And if we just stop, and I've seen people do it where they retire and they stop and they're at home and they watch TV and they don't really do anything anymore.
Yeah, it's the and these are global statistics around when you study what happens to people when they stop working. Globally, it's a really bad thing for their mental
Mhm.
health and their physical health and their life expectancy. All of it goes down. And so I looked at it from like a global health standpoint and was like, wait, why do we want people to do this? Like, it's really bad for your health. Uh
Mm,
so like, is this really the ultimate goal? And and then I from there I was like, okay, what's the alternative? Because none of us want to be engaged in what I call meaningless labor, and
right,
just trading hours for dollars, like that. Just that's not sustainable either. And
right.
we went through a period in history, in the 20th century, where that was the equation. You exchange work, you know work for labor, and in some cases you worked at the same place for 40 years, and then you had a few years in retirement. And and but now it's like, no, that's not how people are operating anymore.
Mm.
And so what people are exchanging for is just like, instead of doing like meaningless labor, I use the phrase like meaningful work. And so as we sort of age, I think there is a trajectory where we hopefully will engage in more meaningful work and find that and search for that and change and look for it, because that is what's sustainable. And that's why people that are over 65 tend to report the highest levels of job satisfaction of any age group. Uh, and so that also is curious to me. It's like, why do old people like work? And I think it does come from that transition into, as we age, there's hopefully a maturity and growth in us that then seeks out more meaning and purposely puts ourselves in position to be engaged in meaningful work as we grow and as we age. And I think that actually is the better recipe. And so it might not be 40 hours in a factory,
Right.
which is kind of like the old kind of like ideal of what it was. So yes, everyone should probably really want to escape that. Like uh and and
Absolutely.
and I think most of the time we don't have an alternative other than retirement, as opposed to, no, like let's reframe that. Like let's not think of it in terms of work and no work, but let's think about it
Mhm.
in terms of, no, we got to be engaged meaningfully in community, or else we suffer.
Right.
Our minds go, our bodies go, and it's not good for us. It's not good for our families. It's not good for not good for society at large either.
Right, right. Well, Jonathan, I want to thank you for your time today. And if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you or get your book, where's the best place for them to find you and your book?
Yeah, the book's available on major retailers like Amazon, Barnes and Noble. So go online, you can buy it there. Or if you can ask your local bookstore if they will carry it. But the book industry is a fun one these days. So just go to Amazon. Amazon's a great place to buy books. And if you want to get in touch with me, or if you have interest in like a life insurance review, you can go to my website. We have thefuturepoor.com, which is sort of the book and the ethical side of my business and work. You can go to fernbridge.us for the actual financial advising practice that I run. Or you can email me, Jonathan Grimm, just my name, JONATHANGRIMM at me.com, to inquire about a life insurance review or anything else regarding retirement or the state of the future or your own situation. We're here to help because we really see a problem, and we want to do everything we can to try and fix it and get people on a different path.
Perfect. And I will make sure to have all of those links in the show notes. Again, thank you very much for your time today, Jonathan. I really
Oh,
appreciate
yeah.
it.
It was great. Great conversation. Glad to be here.